Okay.
But I do want to start by asking, you chose grit and identity because of your experience in volleyball and your the leadership that you received and the lack of support that you mentioned in your topic. But can you identify your reasoning for choosing grit and identity, and also what you mean by the lack of support you received?
Mhm.
We'll start there because I do have some questions on like your master's degree and what you're looking to do with some of those things too. So
Yeah, for sure. So grit and identity, when I was thinking about what topics I wanted to pull from, there's so many, but what those two really, really stuck out with me because those are the biggest obstacles that I felt like I encountered throughout my amateur career in volleyball. Grit because of, like you mentioned, the lack of support. Politics are rampant in any sport at all levels, unfortunately. And it just so happens that my community, the politics within my volleyball community were felt amplified. I'm sure I'm not the only one, and I'm sure I haven't experienced the worst of it, but there were a lot of things going on where I felt I was the underdog, and I felt like I was I was kicked when I was down from all fronts, from coaches, from teammates, from parents. It was just a really hostile environment. So kind of having to go through that experience not alone. My family support was fantastic. And my dad, as a former athlete as well, just helping guide me along the way. But really having to kind of pull myself up by my bootstraps and realize when I got to the point where I was having to decide, do I want to go to school to play volleyball? I had the opportunities. I was by no means a D1 athlete, but I could have probably gone top D2. And I had some opportunities to do D3, or do I focus on my education? What do I want to do? So faced with that identity crisis of my identity has really been a volleyball player for almost 15 years. It was probably just over 10 at that point. But if I don't go on to play college ball, who am I? So those are things that I have had to really work on, especially in my early college years of just figuring out who I was after all that ended. That's a really important topic to me.
mhm. I felt that too a lot when I was playing college baseball, and not knowing if you're going to play professionally, not knowing what you're going to do when your career is over, like not
Mm-hmm.
knowing who you are without this thing. It sucks that like we're not taught growing up. We're taught to be an athlete. We're not taught that we're more than just the sport that we play. I was
Exactly.
always Jeremy, the baseball player, and you're
Yep.
Ryan, the volleyball player.
Yep.
But this is something, unfortunately, that like a lot of athletes need all athletes end their career at one point.
Exactly.
Um, but at what point do you understand that there are other things to life than the sport that you play? How did you like leverage your um, interest in other things? When did you start to think about life after playing?
Well, I've always had a big breadth of interest with music, more recently cooking, but when I was finishing up college volleyball, I was in such a climate where everyone put such importance on that identity. There were some girls, quite frankly, that, they went off to D3 schools just to go play volleyball because they didn't know what else they were going to do. And they ended up kind of not you can't fail out of a volleyball program, but they ended up leaving the program and moved home because they didn't know who they were. They weren't successful. And I knew that I was not going to be that person. I knew that volleyball was not the end all be all for me because, as you said, your career is going to end at some point. And was I the type of person to go play for, the top team at USAV and move on to the lifelong career out of volleyball? No, my talent was not of that as an Olympian. So that's when I started to realize, really, my senior year of high school, of okay, if that's not the end result for me, and if I'm not going to get an opportunity to play volleyball at a school that's going to give me that opportunity, I had College of Charleston had looked at me, and I would have considered going there, but I really knew that my intelligence and my academic interests surpassed that future that I could have had in volleyball.
So like grit and identity, I do think they go hand in hand. However, in dissecting identity, we haven't done that topic yet, which I think is fantastic. Like I was Jeremy, the baseball player. You were Ryan, the volleyball player. Steve is Steve, the football player. If you're giving advice to like a younger self or a current athlete on life outside of playing. In my perspective, what I tell athletes is your sport will end, and find that thing you're passionate about now, because being an athlete right now, and being able to leverage the fact that you're still an athlete, number one, with time, but number two, with community and resources. There's immense power in that, to think about the things that you want to do next. But a lot of athletes don't want to hear that until they're done playing, and then they have to scramble to find something that's next. And it would be interesting to hear your perspective on how you kind of navigated that process.
Yeah, I'll give you the advice that my mom has always given me. In the case that athletics don't work out, you always want to have something to fall back on. And I always knew that if that wasn't going to work out for me in the long term, or I wasn't going to play college ball, I wanted to have an education to fall back on. Now, that doesn't have to be an academic education. It could be going to school, a technical school. It could be going to culinary school. It could be doing contracting work. Some sort of education that you can fall back on just in case athletics doesn't work out. Because let's say you move on to athletics and you go to play college ball and you're doing a great job, and let's say it's, you know, baseball, and the draft comes around and you don't get drafted. What happens then? What if that's kind of the end of the road for you and you go, oh my gosh, what am I gonna do now? You know, I got this degree and, you know, something I'm not really crazy passionate about, or I don't really like, or I don't see myself doing. So my advice is to fall back on the education, and that really comes with try new things. What makes you excited? And this is the beauty of it, is it's always going to change. What you're interested in is always going to evolve, but finding something early and letting it evolve naturally. Have hobbies outside of sports, which I know is difficult with many athlete schedules. With training around the clock, practices, games, tournaments, that is near impossible. But even just really fostering a little bit of time for yourself to reflect and think, what makes me happy outside of this? That was a really important thing for me. For me, it was traveling, getting to see other countries and other cultures, and learning new languages. Getting to really develop my Spanish skills in school really helped me foster my love of travel. And I got the opportunity to go live in Spain for a little bit and really practice my language skills, learning how to cook over there, just trying those new activities and having something to fall back on that can push you forward.
When you were leaving, well, tell me about your decision to go back and pursue graduate education, and why did you choose the field that you did, in the hopes of doing what with it?
Sure. So I had transferred to Vanderbilt from University of Florida, and when I was actually a criminology major my freshman year at University of Florida.
Isn't everybody a criminology major at Florida?
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense, like Florida man, right?
Yes.
But I wanted to be Clarice Starling from Silence of the Lambs. I wanted to do forensic psychology, but I wasn't happy at University of Florida. So when I transferred, I found out about the major I ended up doing, which is called Human and Organizational Development, which essentially is consulting, or, you know, for those who might not be familiar with what consulting is how can you be a problem solver and go into these business situations and help a team solve problems, develop strategy, fix interpersonal relationships, whatever it might be. It's so broad. So that was my undergrad. And when I graduated, I had worked in the music industry and it wasn't for me. I wanted a little bit more structure. So I decided to 180 pivot and go work for a very big corporate law firm here in Nashville. Learned a lot. And a year in, I was like, I hate this. This is not what I went to school for. I did not really like the work environment. The culture was not healthy. And on top of that, my last 6 months went into COVID. So COVID, I think, changed a lot of priorities for everyone across the board. I, for sure, reevaluated mine. And I really thought about, am I happy doing what I'm doing? And the answer was no. And I actually met with a career and life coach myself. And he helped me kind of figure out, what is my own mission? What are my own values? What are my innate skills that I'm naturally good at, that are not things that are learned? So whether it's pragmatic thinking, memorization, whatever it is. So when I met with him, we were able to pinpoint some top strengths of mine. And I had a lot of options out in front of me, which I was so thankful for. And I really was privileged to have so many in front of me. Do I go back to school to get a counseling degree? Do I go and get my MBA? Do I go into forensic psychology? And when I talked with him about it, the answer was really right in front of me. Everything that I wanted to do that involved that creative problem solving, that itched that creative space in my mind, but also used my top strength of pragmatic thinking, was doing just exactly what I did in undergrad. So I looked into programs that would do that, that weren't quite MBAs. I wanted to focus a little bit more on leadership and team development. And Vanderbilt just so happened to have a program that was just that. It's called Leadership and Organizational Performance. And it focuses highly on organizational development work, leadership development, executive coaching. It has been fantastic. And I really do feel I landed where I was supposed to. So I had a lot of support in going through that process. And I'm thankful to that career coach that I worked with. And that's why I'm so passionate about coaching in general, is sometimes you need that other person to kind of help guide you. The way I talk about it is I have a lot of thoughts or ideas that are scrambled in my head, and I really don't know how to untangle them. So it really helps to have that third party person come in. So I am so grateful to him, and this program at Vanderbilt has been the best thing ever.
How can you apply what you learned from that to your own experience playing like high school and college athletics?
A lot of it has to do with leadership. We take a lot of classes and just have a lot of people come in and talk about leadership, but leadership is so subjective. Each organization, each company, each culture, each country is going to have a different preferred style of leadership. So that is going to look different from organization to organization. And how do you define truly what a good leader is? Is it someone that everyone looks to make decisions? Is it a leader that helps facilitate conversation and is inclusive? Is it all of the above? Is it none of those? So realizing what a good leader looks like generally, and then what a good leader looks like in each of those kind of more minutia situations, whether you're in a small team or if it's a CEO, really recognizing what a good leader looks like and kind of the areas you should maybe avoid. That's something that I was able to draw from my career. And unfortunately, I started a little bit backwards. My parents always told me that volleyball or sports is a metaphor for life. They said, your coaches that you have are going to be what you're going to have in good coaches or good bosses or bad bosses, good leaders or bad leaders. So unfortunately, I was faced with a lot of, in my opinion, bad leaders through coaches. I had a few good ones that were, guiding North Stars for me. But seeing what leaders should not be and how leaders have the ability to really tear teams apart and pit people against each other, and they have that much influence, it really started me off on a guide of what not to be or what not to look for. So in working backwards, I've really been able to identify what true good leadership looks like, what it should look like, and even try to implement some of those things myself.
I think back to many coaches and now in the workplace, many leaders, that there are things that I would do differently. There are things that I would change. There are relationships that I would try to foster. There's so many things that we can see as like an athlete working with a coach that we might not necessarily like or won't get along with. That happened to me. That happens to everybody, but it happened to me in very specific scenarios where you just don't see eye to eye, and your style doesn't necessarily match up with their style. And we as athletes maybe try to overcompensate because we really would just want to please everybody. We want everybody to like us. If we're an athlete now listening in, or a coach or a parent, where these conversations come up of hey, I don't like my coach. What are some things that an athlete, in your experience, either on the academic side or just like in practice, what are some things that individual can do to help improve a relationship that they might not always like?
I am such a big proponent of open communication, and it sounds easier than it is. It's like, oh, I feel like the default answer is open communication, over communicate, but really that communication is going to serve as that guiding beacon moving forward. And you can even maybe align that with psychological safety, feeling comfortable enough to come to a coach or to a player and say, hey, there are some issues that I'm feeling we're having. Can we talk it out? But both parties or whoever's involved need to be mature enough to realize, to handle that type of conversation, to not come at it as, well, you said this, or I don't like the way you do this. It has to be a mature conversation. So that's where leadership comes into play. And that's why leaders are so important, to facilitate that type of open dialogue where both people feel comfortable to address what they need to say in a healthy way and not add fuel to the fire. I wish that had been the case with me. If there were any, issues with teammates, there were some coaches that kind of just turned a blind eye, or were like, oh, I'm not going to deal with this. They can work it out themselves. And I felt, for myself, I was the one who kind of had to take the high road a lot and say, we have these issues, but let's put them aside, keep it all, give all we got on the court. And once we get off the court, we don't have to be friends. But if we are on the court, we're teammates, and we're going to do this together because we want to win, and we want to win and lose as one unit. So it really just requires, again, that leadership facilitating, or any support system facilitating that you handle a conversation in that way and not really adding fuel to the fire. It's so easy to point fingers, or, play mind games, or be exclusionary, but, those things will stay with you for a long time. I still remember some instances where that had happened to me, and those have not left my memory, and they really still hurt. So just knowing that those types of things can really affect people for a long time as well.
We talked about identity earlier, and I think it's reflected most in an environment that we're unhappy with. My 2 years playing professional baseball, it was a bad clubhouse. It was a bad team. We were also really bad on the field. I think both seasons of 72 games each. I think in year 1 we won 19 of 72, and then in year 2 we won like 21 or so. Pretty much the same team too. We were really bad, and we were a bad unit, and it made me really frustrated as an athlete who was always taught, like, do whatever you can to win, but in professional baseball, like, winning doesn't matter. For athletes who are struggling with that identity, their clubhouse or their locker room, it's not the tightest unit. They're trying to find who they are as a leader. They're trying to be more vocal, but it's just not working. I mean, there are countless examples in my career, and maybe in yours, where like athletes are just lost and they don't know what to do. And so in your perspective, in your experience, like, if someone wants to start and kind of take the pulse of their team and their scenario and their situation, where should an athlete start if they want to improve on these skills of leadership and identity?
I think leaning into your support system is going to be number one, whether that is a close teammate or teammates that you have, whoever might be in your example, in your clubhouse, who can you lean on to share these things? Because keeping all those things inside, that's only going to hurt you. It's going to build more resentment. It's going to create more confusion, and it might seem scary. But if you have someone that you trust, and if you don't feel like there's someone you trust in your organization or your team, family or friends outside of the organization where you feel more safe to share those things and no fear of retaliation, because that is a huge problem, that fear of retaliation. Really leaning in to that support system, being honest and transparent, but also realizing that sometimes life is going to throw these situations at you, and it really is up to you on how you want to handle it. Do you want to leave, or do you want to figure this out and kind of rise above it? Because guaranteed that is not going to be the only time that's going to happen to you. And I think that was my realization, is this is really, and maybe this sounds a little pessimistic, but this is really only the start. But when you are in situations that are positive and uplifting with positive leadership and a really supportive team, you don't take that for granted. And the organization I'm with now is so positive, and everyone is so aligned around the mission, and the leadership is fantastic, and I feel so supported. And because I've had those negative experiences, I am that much more grateful for it, and I just don't take it for granted at all.